Hello, everyone. This is Betsy Wurzel. You're a host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio Network, a subsidiary of Global Media Network, LLC. Our mantra is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. The views of the guest may not represent those of the host of the station. Folks, I'm so grateful to do what I do because I am so passionate to let you all know about resources and let you know about resources that I wish I knew about in my caregiving days. And I have exceptional guests with me today, as I always do. I have with me today Veronica Shears. She's an RN. She's a certified End of Life Doula. She worked as a critical care nurse for 30 years. She is founder of Guiding Your Light at End of Life. She is a nurse for 42 years, and she wrote a chapter titled Hospice and the End of Life Doula in the international best-selling book, The Caregiver's Advocate, A Complete Guide to Support and Resources. Now, I have interviewed previous guests who have written a chapter in this wonderful book, The Caregiver's Advocate. So if you don't already have that book and you're a caregiver, and even if you're not a caregiver, you will be, I would suggest buying this book. It's a book I wish I had 14 years ago. And I want to welcome Veronica Shears, RN, to Chatting with Betsy. Welcome, Veronica.
Thank you, Betsy, so much for inviting me to join you for this radio show today. I'm very excited to share what I have come to learn and the beauty of caregiving for our loved ones at the end of life. Thank you.
Well, you are welcome. It is my pleasure to have you on. These topics, is, you know, Veronica, because you've been in the field for so long, people don't want to talk about end of life. They don't want to talk about planning their end of life, well, and what they want it to look like, and it's so important for people to do that. And first, I'd like to know, how did you become a death doula after working in critical care for 30 years?
So I've been working nights in critical care for all 30 years, and I was working 12-hour shifts, and my body was shot, and I needed to step away from the bedside for a while. I don't computer well and didn't want to sit behind a desk somewhere, and so I took a medical leave, medical retirement, and I was out healing my body by traveling the United States. And while I was out, across my feed came the Doula Givers Institute, the school where I took my training. And they had a 90-minute course. And I knew in my heart that yes, my body was shot, but my mind and my heart were still a nurse. And I decided that would be the best course for me to take. And so I signed up to a 12-week on Zoom class and loved it, and knew that it was where I was going next. It was during COVID. I was living on the road, and I was doing telework with clients through a Zoom channel of my own. So that was the exciting part. And that's how I started. And then came back to my home base because my sisters were getting very tested by caring for my parents by themselves, and they wanted some extra help. And so I came home for that. And got a job at Hospice, my local hospice, and I worked there per diem and can use my doula skills in working with them, sort of filling the gap that hospice leaves. And my and my work is willing to support me through that. So that's what I get to do. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. That is incredible. That I can just imagine your body being burned out, Veronica, because I work nights, and your body does take a toll. Working night shift, number one. Being the 12-hour shifts is very difficult on your body, and critical care nursing is very stressful. I didn't like it when I was pulled there, but that's because I wasn't trained for that area. So I definitely can understand you leaving after so many years. You did your dues, that's for sure. And thank you for your service for all those years. I'd like to know, people may want to know, what does a death doula do, and what do you look for when hiring one?
My perfect client is the person that has just found out that they have a terminal diagnosis, or who has advanced age and is realizing that, someday they're actually going to die. Like you said, our society does not talk about death, and so bringing this conversation up is very important. We need and the new movement within the death doula society is to talk about it, so that we can have the death that is a good death. And so it's a death positive attitude that we're trying to teach people about. This is not something that you can put off. Any decision that you put off in your younger years and put on your children or loved one's plate just makes that plate heavier for them to carry.
Absolutely.
If you look for your own mortuary and make all your mortuary arrangements, the mortuary I worked with had an insurance plan set up, so that you could make all your arrangements, let your wishes be known, and then you start your payments. Now, I started when I was 62. My payments weren't that high. My husband started at 52, and his payments were lower. If you make payments for 2 years and you pass, everything's paid for.
Yes. And that is a great idea. Yeah, I did that for Matt, my husband. And a good thing I did, I already had started with the cemetery, planning that. But I went down to the funeral home, and I pre-planned it. And I had made some payments, but then I felt weird doing it. And then I just said, I'll just pay it out of his insurance. I kind of felt guilty doing that, and there's no need to feel guilty, folks. That was just me. But that's great to make the payments, but the cemetery was paid off. And, it's prime real estate, folks. It's very expensive. So I would absolutely want to encourage people start pre-planning. It's not morbid. We are all going to die. That's a reality. Let's plan it.
Perfect.
We plan everything else, don't we?
Yes, indeed.
So why can't we plan that? Excuse me.
Betsy, do you mind if I explore for a second what made you feel guilty about it?
You know what? That's a good question. And it was unjustified. I felt that I was doing something behind Matt's back, and I felt guilty. Like, I'm doing this and he's still alive. But you know what, folks? There was no reason to feel guilty. That's why I want to tell everyone there's no reason to feel guilty. And I tell people, learn from my mistakes. Don't be like me. And I wish that I did pay it. but there was I just couldn't after a few months. But yet the cemetery I had to pay for, so I had to do that.
Right.
Excuse me.
Right.
And I'm glad I did, because that was in 2018, and Matt died January 1st, 2020, and the cemetery was paid off.
Right.
So
Perfect.
It's very, very, very important to do that. And I want to ask you about, there's so many things to ask about, and I think I have undiagnosed ADHD, folks, because my mind is like, I could go from one thing to the next. You wrote a chapter in the book, The Caregiver's Advocate, titled Hospice and the End of Life Doula. What is that chapter about? I'm going to start with that, because I really want to ask, you have to answer that. What does someone look for in picking out a hospice? Because I had the hospice from hell. So people need to know that information.
So unfortunately, hospice is driven by insurance. And so the reason that you want to add a doula to the experience is that the insurance limits how much time a hospice nurse can spend at the bedside. So in their early admission to hospice, if they're not actively dying, they're seen once a week for a half an hour. As they start to get sicker and what we call transitioning, where they're in bed and they're no longer able to care for themselves as much, but they're still awake and talking, then you can go to a half an hour twice a week. It's not until they are actively dying that you get a daily visit. A doula, on the other hand, and hospice only comes to you at 6 months, at the what's medically termed 6 months before you pass. Now, some people that get onto hospice only stay alive for 2 weeks or 48 hours. A doula can come in from the first word of a terminal diagnosis or a very elderly client. My current client is 94 years old. She doesn't want to die. I don't want her to die. So we're working on how to live her best life now. What we can do within the confines of her loss of mobility to still have a fulfilling life with the time that she has left.
Yes.
So a doula is allowed to be at the bedside as long as the family and the client need me there. Family, loved ones, best friend, whoever's working with the client, and the client themselves, they're the ones that decide how much of my time they need, and I'm there for them. So I get to go right now with my client. I'm seeing her for 2 hours every other week, and she's really happy with that. She doesn't have hospice on board. I need to collaborate with hospice. Hospice has the medications that eventually my client will need, but at the moment she doesn't need them. So we haven't chosen to go to hospice yet, and a doula can help you with that decision. As far as picking the right hospice, it's not the easiest job to do. It sort of takes, well, let me, I'll go to the one that so-and-so recommended, and I don't know, how many options you had. Here in Pleasant Hill, there's a gazillion options for a hospice, but not everybody has that. But if you're not jiving with them, get out right away. The sooner the better, so that you can have the good death experience that you're looking for.
Yes, and I highly recommend, and I learned this from my own experience, if you have someone who's terminally ill, like Matt had early onset Alzheimer's, and he really progressed very quickly near the end of his life. Start doing your research ahead of time. Even hire someone to help you navigate the hospice process and helping you, guide you. And do doulas do that? Veronica, do you help with the... that's really important. Yes. And folks, I can't say it enough. One of the reasons I do what I do is because I'm so passionate for you all to know about resources that I didn't know I had. I interviewed a doula, End of Life Doula, I think a year or two ago, who lives the next town over, but I didn't know about her. And this is why I do what I do with a passion, because I want you all to know about resources. They may not be in your area, but at least you know about them and you could check your area. Veronica's in California, USA. Maybe you live in the Philippines. Maybe you live somewhere else, but you will have this information and will know what to ask and know what to do. It's so important. It's so important. I can't go on a soapbox. Go ahead, Veronica.
The school I went to is international. It's called Doula Givers Institute. There is a listing that they have with doulas all over the world. There's and I was trained during COVID, so I have the opportunity to be a teledoula, so I can, like your other telehealth experiences, I can be in those places where there's not a doula the next town over, or there's not a doula within 50 miles. I can come, and it's not, I like to be able to touch, so it's a piece that I miss. I like to be able to give a hug when a hug is needed, and so those two pieces are a little bit more difficult in a tele situation, but it doesn't mean you can't have the best death possible with the help of a doula.
Excuse me. Also, just want to make sure, now Medicare, they pay for hospice, but they don't pay for doulas. You have to pay that out of pocket.
Yes, you do have to pay that out of pocket. I personally think it's worth it. I personally give a sliding scale. If you can't afford it, I can still come to you. I have there's a program with my with the Doula Givers Institute that will supplement the amount that you pay and the amount that I need to charge to make my company profitable. And so if you have difficulty, things can be worked out.
I highly recommend it. I wish I knew, back 5 years ago, doulas weren't that popular at the time. You were hearing more about death doulas, end of life doulas, and I wish that I had one, folks. I really do. I could have used that extra support because the hospice I had, we didn't get any support. Zilch. And we had a hospice based out of our hospital, which is a huge medical healthcare system in New Jersey, which I can't say the name, but it's one of the big major ones. And I was very, very shocked of their attitudes and the way they treated us. And Matt had to go up. The one thing about this hospice is that they had a hospice unit in the hospital, which is where Matt died. And he needed 24/7 care. And they said that, I guess in New Jersey, it's the law you can have a IV, like medication, sedation at home. Or maybe it's a hospice thing, I don't know. but he had to go up to the hospital. They said they don't do that at home, in a home setting. Does that vary state to state, Veronica? Do you know?
Hospice will steer away from IV hydration. If someone is insisting that they need hydration IV, then they will put in a subcutaneous system that would deliver fluid just to under the skin, and it would be absorbed.
Yeah, he wasn't getting IVs, just the medication through the
right. And that wouldn't happen in a home setting. No, they're unable to do that in a home setting. For the dying. Now, if they have IV antibiotics that they send you home and train you how to give, then that's a different thing. But to do IV medications at home, no.
Okay.
Not here in California.
Yeah, not in
on the IV route. We put medications under your tongue. It's the buccal space. It has the most blood flow, and it absorbs rapidly. Within 20 minutes, your medicine is on board under your tongue.
Yes. And picking out a hospice, Veronica, what should people ask when they're interviewing hospices? What's some questions they should be asking?
You know, Betsy, that's a great question, but I don't have an answer to it. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, that's not something I have an answer for.
Because I know every area is different. In my area, New Jersey, okay, yes, Medicare pays for hospice, but they only pay for their ones that are approved. So if you don't have the money, you have to go to what they approve of, unless you could pay it out of pocket. Who could afford that? No, I certainly couldn't.
Most because hospice is paid by Medicare, most of the hospices that I know of all accept Medicare. Even your for-profit hospices accept Medicare, and so do nonprofit hospices. So the actual out-of-pocket cost is minimal to none. And
that
so the services that you would get in a hospice situation, you would have access to the registered nurse or a LVN that would come check on your loved one. You would have a home health aide available for 2 to 3 times a week as needed in the situation. You would have a social worker that unfortunately only comes once a month, and that's where I feel is a big detriment to the family and the loved one, because there's a lot of things that need to be discussed and can't always be broached just by the family. I don't profess to be a social worker, but when we have hospice on board, I can get into subjects, and when I get over my head and don't have the right answers or the right resources, I can ask for the social worker to come extra. Families don't know that they can ask for more time with the social worker. But Medicare will only initially give you 1 visit a month. Is how that's done.
Okay. I also know that not every hospice has like a ward where you could go and get 24/7 care.
Right.
So that's,
the hospice I work for in Pleasant Hill, we have a contract with the hospital, so they can stay at the hospital if they're not stable enough to transfer home. We also have what we call a Bruns house. It's a 6-bed house with space enough for families to be gathered there, multiple families to be gathered there. to be with their loved one through the process. An admission to Brunn's house usually starts with uncontrolled symptoms that we can't manage at home, and we recommend that they go to the Brunn's house. If there's a situation where the family really, they still have to live in the house after the person dies, and they don't want to imagine that situation where they're going to see their family member that's in the process of dying while they're at home. And so they can ask to go into, ask for a transfer to the Brunn's house. If they need respite care, if they need to have a break away from their loved one and they've been a 24-hour caregiver for 2 and 3 years before they get to a terminal diagnosis, they need help. They need to get away and have a break of their own. And Medicare gives you a respite care situation for 5 days in a calendar year. And so that's something that you can be cognizant of taking advantage of when you have a hospice situation.
That's good to know. I will. I'll give some suggestions, Veronica. I think from what I've learned from my experience and talking to different people, when choosing a hospice, ask if they're profit or not profit. Ask if they do have a place where your loved one can go. Ask what supports they have. Do they have the chaplain? Some people have music therapy. Some hospices have volunteers. And ask if the nurse does come out if you need them. And these are just so important. Now, I was told that, I could call up any time. However, the nurse wouldn't come out to assess Matt in his agitation, even though he fell. Matt fell twice, and they wouldn't come out. It was just, I tell people, take the experience that I had. That's the unusual. That's not how it's supposed to be. That's completely opposite of what's supposed to be. Hospice is supposed to be supportive of the dying person and the family. And unfortunately, we didn't receive that. And they did hear my mouth. I actually, the social work. Yes.
I'm glad you spoke up. They needed to know that. They needed to know that you weren't being served appropriately.
Oh, yes. I spoke up all right. I even filed formal complaints, but nothing was done. But the social worker came to my house, and she said that, no one calls up as much as you. Why are you calling up so much? And I said, well, because I'm looking for a solution to a problem, and you're giving more of the same medication and telling you it's not working. And the fact that she tried to blame me, and then when I told her that Matt had a headache, and Matt never complained, she had the audacity to tell me he couldn't possibly have a headache. I said, how do you know? Do you have a dying brain? Do you know what a dying brain feels like? Then you have no right to say that he can't have a headache.
Yeah,
indeed. And I had a fight. I literally had a fight verbally to get Matt up in that hospice unit. And I told, when he fell out of bed that Sunday morning, and I called up and, told him the situation, and I said, so I'm going to come out? And then the hospice nurse said, I don't know. I said, wrong answer. I said, I'll tell you what I know. I'm going to call you up every minute. And in between calling you up, I'm calling up your regional director, and I'm calling up Medicare. And I'm placing a complaint. And she said, oh, don't do that, Mrs. Sloan. That's my married name. And she called up, and she called me back, and she said, Matt, do you want Matt to come up here? And I said, yes, I need help. He needs help. He's dying. They didn't believe me that he was dying, Veronica, because he was walking around. He was walking around. Now, I'm always ahead of my time, Veronica. Not to brag, but I've always been ahead of my time. And I think hospices worldwide need to re-educate themselves on what a dying person looks like. Because I told that home hospice nurse, get your head out of that textbook. I'm telling you, he's dying. 2 weeks later, he died. Because not everyone fits the picture. I think that people who are diagnosed young with early onset Alzheimer's or whatever dementia it is, you're not going to see them typically in bed maybe dying. They could be walking around and dying.
Right.
And they're going to find this out. I guarantee it.
Yeah.
I guarantee it. I had someone I knew on Facebook she said, Betsy, my husband's acting like Matt. Do you think my husband's dying? And I said, well, I don't know. I don't know your husband. And she told me her situation, and I said, get him under hospice. We could get the medication. Well, I don't know what happened. She took him home, and her husband was walking around, and he died a few days later.
Yeah.
So, and he was young. He was also around Matt's age.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that, especially like in taking out a hospice, they need to listen, and support the patient's family.
Definitely.
It's so important.
Definitely.
And you can change hospices.
Yes, you can.
Was it yes, you can. I didn't change because it was so near to the end, and that was the only place I knew that had a unit where I could drive to.
Right.
So I was kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. Right.
So once he got to the unit, did their responses improve?
When Matt got to the unit, he had one-to-one supervision, and they said to me, "Oh, now we see what you're talking about, Betsy." I said, "What do you think? I'm making it up?" It was much better. There was one nurse I didn't particularly like, but it was much better care.
Good.
And people came in to see who the big mouth was. People that I didn't even meet, they go, "Oh, we want to know how Mr. Sloan is doing." I'm thinking, no, you want to know who the big mouth was causing the waves, because I met with the director of hospice, and I told her I was not happy. I was not happy. And they even had the nerve, Veronica, to tell me that he would be going home. They told me he would be going home the following weekend. I said, I don't think so. I don't think so. It was unreal. Unreal. But I know you have a business. What does your business do, guiding your light at the end of life, and how do people contact you to hire you, find out about your business?
You can reach me at the email address that you have, Betsy, guidingyourlight99@gmail.com is the easiest way to reach me. I've been in business for 3 years. I have a lot of experience behind me. There is a resource out there called Ask a Death Doula. It's the teacher of my program. It's on YouTube. She is an amazing resource that can give you a lot of feedback. They offer a 90-minute free class about how to care for your dying loved one at home. And it goes through the stages of shock and stabilization and transition so that you know what to be aware of. It is a very, very valuable resource. Another one is Dr. Karen Wyatt. She is a hospice nurse. She's available on YouTube also. And where else do I find her? I find her on the podcast channel too. And they both have amazing resources about hospice experiences and things that you can do to help to care for your loved one. Karen has a lot of, she's had Suzanne on her program multiple times so that she, stays in touch with the pulse of the situation, along with Barbara Carnes has multiple small booklets out about death and dying. And she's a registered nurse. She was one of the early founders of hospice movement, and she's got amazing resources also.
What was Karen's last name?
Wyatt.
Wyatt.
W-Y-A-T-T.
Okay.
Karen. Yeah.
I'll have to look her up. It's so important to know these resources. I know there's a couple of hospice nurses that are on Instagram that give great information. Hospice Julie, Hospice Penny. They're on Instagram, YouTube. That gives. I'm so glad that these nurses are educating people, and I wished it was they had this a few years ago, because even though I saw people die, Veronica, as a nurse, I never saw anyone die like Matt, and I really did not know the dying process.
Right.
And I think people should, be familiar with it, so you're not shocked at what you see.
Right. My motto is from scared to prepared, and the best way to be prepared is education. So 90% of my job is educating the family and the client. If your family member tells you or your loved one tells you that they're not hungry, whatever you do, I want you to believe them and not make them eat. I know you love them. I know you think that that's the wrong thing. They have to eat. They'll die. Well, but they are. They'll get to the point they lose their appetite. It's just gone. The signal isn't there anymore. From the signal being gone, the next step is that they lose their ability to swallow. If they're eating or drinking something and they're coughing while they're doing it, their ability to swallow is leaving them. You would thicken their fluid with a thickening agent that you can get at the store or with your hospice to make it easier for them to drink until the point comes when they can't swallow at all. And then they start pocketing their food. If they're still able to swallow, you would go to the comfort feedings, baby food, pudding, applesauce. Those kind of consistencies are still able to swallow, but they might not be able to chew anymore because they'll pocket their food. Once they get to the point that they can't swallow, if you continue to force them to eat, when you put a spoon to someone's mouth, the reflex is to open their mouth and take the spoon. But if they can't swallow and they aspirate that food, the food goes into their lungs. That's what aspirate means. Food goes into their lungs, and they will cough, 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 not be able to get it out, and it will hasten their death. And it's not a pretty death. So the big, big deal is when they're not able to swallow, swab their mouth. Keep their mouth moist. Don't try and force food, and let nature take its course. They're not hungry. They don't know that they're hungry, and they'll not. I have a scenario of slaving over a meal because if they have the food that they love, surely they'll eat this food. I worked so hard for it. And you present the food and they take 2 bites. And because we put so much emphasis in our hearts that food is love, we equate food with love, that I've done this out of love. Well, it's not that they don't love you. It's that they can't swallow it. They're not hungry. They'll eat 2 bites, and you're devastated. But that's not what they can do anymore. So you just have to be a little bit receptive to that. And I know it's really, really difficult. But I've seen the people that are aspirating and how difficult that death is for them. So
yes, that's
my
very true.
Learning tips.
Well, thank you. And, I wasn't aware of this, that at the end of life they have high fevers. And Matt was having high fevers, and I felt guilty because he was getting Tylenol suppository, but he wasn't getting IV fluids. But then I learned that would have done him more harm because his body couldn't handle the fluids. And I love that quote, scared to prepared. I love that, Veronica. That is so awesome. I got to put that in the information in the blog because it's so true. We need to educate ourselves so we can go from scared to prepared. Folks, it's so important. I'm telling you, and I really don't know how much I could bang it over someone's head, but it's really important to educate yourselves. I'm always talking about education on the show, education and being an advocate. Being an informed caregiver makes it less stressful for you and your loved one. Take it for someone who's walked through those waters. But there wasn't the information available back then. There is more information now in 2024, soon to be 2025, about dying. There's a lot more information out there. Please educate yourself and be prepared. Don't be scared to prepared.
Yeah.
I love that.
Go ahead, Veronica. There's a book that Barbara Carnes has called When the Time Comes, and it goes over each one of the possible symptoms that someone can have in the dying process. And one of them is actually the fever, and one of them is the no swallowing, and what we call in the business, we call it terminal agitation. And that's what you saw Matt having towards the end, was terminal agitation. And until it's medicated properly, it's uncomfortable to watch, and it's uncomfortable to be around, and they're not safe. And being able to have someone there that can stay with you through that process and keep them safe is a very big thing in my book, in my work.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Veronica, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your experience with us. And I'm going to spell your name for the audience. Folks, you heard Veronica Shears. That's Scheers. She's an RN, a certified End of Life Doula. Many years experience. I would definitely recommend looking up Veronica Shears and reading the book, getting the book, The Caregiver's Advocate, A Complete Guide to Support and Resources. And Veronica's chapter is Hospice and the End of Life Doula. That is so important to read that chapter. I can't thank you enough, Veronica, for the work that you do, and really appreciate you coming on, spending time with me today.
Thank you so much, Betsy, for allowing me to educate other people so that they can have the best death possible for their loved one, and to know that they too will eventually die, and to have all the pieces in place so that it's not a burden to their loved ones. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Absolutely. My pleasure. Folks, all the information about Veronica Shears, RN, will be in the blog that Jeannie White, who's the station manager, writes. Thank you, Jeannie. Jeannie produces the show. And I wanted to thank Lillian Caldwell, the CEO of Passionate World Talk Radio, who makes this all possible. And I want to thank you, the listeners. Thank you for listening and subscribing. Folks, please share the show. I want to help as many people as possible. I'm here to be a resource. I'm here to help you. That's why I do what I do, because I want you to know you're not alone. There are resources out there to help you. Veronica's Shares RN is an excellent resource. I have excellent people on the show that are experts in their field. And I'm grateful, really, to do what I do, and that's why I want to help as many people as possible, but I need your help to do it. So share with a friend. If you know someone who needs hospice, if you know a caregiver, if you know someone who's terminally ill, just received a diagnosis, tell them about this podcast. Tell them about Veronica Shares. Tell them about the book, The Caregiver's Advocate. We all are going to be in that place. And if you're not a caregiver already, I guarantee you, you will be. I've been a caregiver, and I am a caregiver, still a caregiver. So it's just a fact of life, folks. And I just want to thank you all for listening. Chatting with Betsy is free to subscribe to on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, to name a few. And I appreciate it if you would subscribe and leave a review. And I just want to thank you all again for listening. As I always say at the end of my show, in a world where you could be anything, please be kind, to shine your light bright, because we need it now more than ever. And if you want to follow me, I am on Facebook, Betsy E. Wurzel, Wurzel, and I have a Facebook group, #Kick Alzheimer's Ass Movement. Everyone's welcome to join. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio Network, a subsidiary of Global Media Network, LLC. Till we chat again, happy holidays and Happy New Year, everyone. Bye-bye now.